In Matthew 24, Jesus starts to speak to us about what would happen in the end times and what would happen soon after. Because of the times that we're living in, it's important that we reflect and read once more what Jesus had to say about the end times. Join us as we take a look at Matthew 24. Great to have everyone here once more with us. As we do a Bible passage, we'll be doing these more consistently. And because of the times, I felt led to share Matthew 24. And as you know, Matthew 24 is connected with other books as Revelation, as Daniel, as Ezekiel, many other prophets. Jesus knew this, and that's why he actually connected all of these together and brought us this chapter of Matthew 24. We'll start reading. It's 51 verses, and we'll get through all of this in this video. I hope you stay here to the end, and also consider sharing this video with others, because if it's a blessing to you, it will probably be a blessing to someone else. In Matthew 24, it begins with Jesus speaking about the temple. He had just left the temple in 23, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees had been asking him questions and trying to get him to fail and to say something wrong. Jesus, of course, having all the answers, gave all the correct, the best answers possible, and he shut them up, is really what happened in chapter 23. As he's leaving, this is what happens. The disciples actually starts to speak to Jesus. And in verse 24:1, it says, "Then Jesus went out and he departed from the temple. And his disciples came up to him and to show him the buildings of the temple." Because they were big, they were awestruck of the temple. It was a beautiful temple, not as beautiful as the one from Solomon's time, but beautiful nonetheless. It was the biggest building in that location, in that area. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." What he was saying is that in the future, that Jerusalem and the temple were going to be destroyed. That not to be an awestruck, because they were going to be destroyed soon after. Looking a little bit fast forward, that did happen in the year 70 AD. The Romans had had enough with the Israelites and all the revolutions and all the little things like that. They came in and they plummeted the city. They took down everything. I've had this question asked several times, where people ask about the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is a retaining wall. It's actually not part of the temple. It just sustains the mount, that the mountain wouldn't fall down. And that's what the Wailing Wall is, and that's still intact. In my opinion, even that one day may be broken down because of what Jesus is saying here. In verse 3 now, it says, "Now he sat at the Mount of Olives," which is really not that far from the temple. "The disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these signs be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?'" Now you see, at that moment, the disciples knew this heaviness was coming upon them, but they didn't know exactly what was happening or what was going to happen. What they expected to happen was that the Messiah, Jesus, was going to take over like a king and just get rid of the Romans at that moment, maybe within days, maybe within weeks, maybe within a year, but that it was going to happen. But Jesus was starting to tell them that that was not the case, and they were just confused from this all. And Jesus starts to clarify a little bit more. In verse 4, it says, "Jesus answered and said to them, 'Take heed, for no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all of these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet.'" Once again, Jesus starts to say what's going to happen in the future. And I like what he says about hearing wars and rumors of wars. Because it's not necessarily that there will be wars, but that they will start hearing about these wars and rumors of wars. You know, over the years, there's been many wars. But even now, so with our media, the rumors of wars are even greater than the actual wars. And it's just like Jesus, of course, knew the future and was telling them, you hearing wars is going to be multiplied. And all these things are just going to happen in a multiplied fashion. It wasn't that there wasn't wars then. It was that it was going to be heard even more of that. And it says that many will come in my name, but make sure that you are not deceived. And in verse 7 it says, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. In other versions it says that a people will rise against other people. And that's kind of what we're seeing now, where it's not just kingdoms. We rarely have kingdoms, but we definitely have governments, as we have in our constitutions of the United States, as we the people. And even within the United States, if you notice, all the fighting is people fighting other people. It's not kingdoms, and it's not really just king against king. We don't really have that, but we have governments and we have people rising against people. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. Now, there have been earthquakes recorded all throughout history. And even right now, there's earthquakes happening in many places of the world. The tectonic plates move, constantly readjust. But there's always one or two big earthquakes that mark the generations. And if you really think about it, this hasn't happened in the recent times, and it could be one of the things that happen soon here. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. So what he's saying is that even then, it's not the end. It's only the beginning it's going to happen. Verse 9, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. I must pause in this verse to remind you that Jesus was speaking to his disciples specifically. And he was specifically speaking to the Jewish people. Of course, he had us in mind, the Gentiles, the ones that are not Jewish. He had us in mind. He knew that we would read this, but he had the Jewish people in mind. And if you look at the times right now, it would seem that the things that happen in Israel would be everybody in unison, that it was so horrible how innocent people, Hamas would come in and kill innocent people that had nothing to do. It's one thing to kill soldiers that are in the Israeli military, but they killed innocent people. And you would think that everybody would band together and say that this is wrong. But there's been many protests against Israel, pro-Palestine and pro-Hamas. And again, you see this verse playing out right now. And it says that many will deliver you to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and will betray one another, and they will hate one another. Once again, you see that within our society, where people are hating each other, even happening right now, where they'll cancel somebody just for what they say. And maybe sometimes what they say is offensive, and it says they will be offended. A generation who's offended. That might be a teaching there just in itself. An offended generation will rise, and I believe that that's what we're seeing right now. Then many false prophets will arise and will deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And I got to tell you personally, I try not to hear the news so much. And the reason being is because we get oversensitized, overexposed to all these things that are happening. And at one point you're like, I don't want to hear it anymore. Now I'm speaking personally, but I don't know if that's happened to you. And this is right here. It says the love of many will grow cold. You don't want to hear another thing. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. I personally like this verse so much. And it's why the reason that we do things, that we do everything that we do, is because we're trying to fulfill this verse right here, where Jesus says to the disciples, go and make disciples. And he's saying that the gospel will be preached all over the world. Verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and it says, whoever reads, let him understand. Jesus is referencing the book of Daniel when Daniel is speaking about this abomination that's going to happen in the temple of the Jewish people, in the third temple. I don't want to go there because it'll take more time. There's 51 chapters here in verse 24 of Matthew, in chapter 24 of Matthew. But Daniel starts to speak about this desolation, this abomination that's going to happen. It seems like the person that we call the Antichrist is going to rise up, and he is going to do sacrifices in the third temple that are considered abomination. Some theologians think that it's going to be some kind of pig or something that's abomination to the Jewish people because they consider the pig unclean. And after that, he is going to sit on the throne of the Jewish people, proclaiming himself God. You can read this in the book of Daniel. And Jesus referenced this. And he says, he who reads, let him understand. Telling us, foreshadowing us, speaking directly to us, saying, you could go read the book of Daniel and look into this more. I keep reading here in verse 16. Then let those who are in Judea flee from the mountains. Flee to the mountains. Let him who's on the rooftop not go back down to take anything but out of his house. And let him who is in the field do not go back to get his clothes. I'm going to keep reading, but I'm going to pause in a minute. But woe is to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. It's sad to say that we were able to see a small picture of this in that attack on that Saturday to the Jewish people, where there was families fleeing their houses. They hadn't had time to grab anything. They were just fleeing out the doors, fleeing out the windows, running through the fields, trying to hide. And they were running against them. They were being hunted down. And once again, all that is just a window of what's going to happen in the end of times. Remember, Jesus is saying, wait, it's not even the end of times yet. Wait a little more, because you're going to see things that are even worse. Number 20, verse 20, it says, and pray that your flight may not happen in the winter or on Sabbath. What Jesus is saying is that when the Jews have their holy days, the Sabbath is a holy day, the Jewish people are celebrating, resting, or just like if it was us, it was Thanksgiving here in America or Christmas. They're taking a breather and they're saying, hopefully you won't get attacked in that time. And lo and behold, that when the Jewish people were attacked, the Israelites were attacked this time, it was towards the end of a holy day and on a Sabbath. It's just, to me, it's unbelievable how we're seeing the Bible play out in real time. In number 21, it says, for then there will be great tribulation, such that has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall there ever be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. I don't know if you felt this, but time has been going faster and faster. For those people who have lived longer, they've known that in the past, for some reason, time seems longer. And now time seems just shorter and shorter and shorter. And Jesus spoke to this. I don't know exactly how, but there is ways that he is able to do this. I'll give you one big way that scientists have been able to see and observe this in the universe. Did you know that in the universe is expanding? The known universe is expanding. So as our Earth goes through the solar system, as our solar system goes through the Milky Way, it's expanding in the universe and it's growing, it's expanding out. The known universe is actually getting bigger, and as it gets bigger, it's actually going at a faster rate. The way that scientists are able to see this is because they're able to calculate the speed of light as it travels through the distance of space. I know I might have lost some people, but all of this is indicated by scientists that know nothing of the Word of God. And they're saying that because of the speed is actually affecting our time. I know that you and I, our time, 60 seconds, seems like it's set in stone. But because of the vast space of time, time is actually a relative thing based on the person who's observing it. Albert Einstein actually spoken about this in his theory of general relativity, where time is actually not constant. Time is specific, subjective to the person who is feeling it or within it. Remember that Jesus, God himself, is outside of time. All of this works together, and Jesus says this, that time will be shortened because of the elect. In verse 25, it says, "See that I have told you all of this stuff beforehand. Therefore, if they say, 'Look to you, look in the desert, don't go out.' Or 'Look, he's in the inner rooms,' don't believe it." Don't just be fooled by people saying things. Make sure you always come from the Bible, back to the Word of God. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now, that word Son of Man comes from the book of Daniel as well. Daniel calls the Messiah the Son of Man. And this is what Jesus keeps referencing. And the Pharisees hated it because they knew that he was referencing the Messiah that is spoken about in Daniel. And Jesus once again speaks to the Son of Man himself as the Messiah. In verse 28, "For whenever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together." What he's saying is that there will be signs where there's a dead body. There's going to be eagles coming to try and eat that dead body. There's going to be signs that the dead body is there. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. I've been in very small earthquakes, and I felt it, but wasn't able to be in a big earthquake, and that's a great thing. But the people who have been in earthquakes, what they often say is that, especially if it's at nighttime, the earth is moving, so it appears that the stars are shaking because we are moving, the ground is moving, so the stars, it's not that they're moving, it's that we're moving, but it seems that as the observer observes, is that the stars are moving. And that could be an explanation of that, or it could be an explanation of asteroids hitting the earth and coming down to the earth. Any of these could be a possibility. Here's one other thing that I like to insert here. When you're reading anything that has to do with the end times and Revelation and just prophecy that's going to happen, nobody's going to have the exact thing that's going to happen or the precise events. We're all reading it together. We're all deciphering it together. And yes, God does give revelation, but it's things of God that we don't understand. We're only just getting a small little window of. We don't fully understand it. I always give this example. It's like if you take your cell phone and you were to try to explain your cell phone to a person who lived 100 years ago. It is just a really hard thing for you and I to be able to do, because that person from 100 years ago, you would have to explain to them, maybe they had photography, but you'd have to explain to them video, high resolution, Wi-Fi, internet, electricity. It goes on and on. So you'd be having just a hard time explaining your cell phone to a person who lived just 100 years ago. Now try to imagine explaining things of God, things that are happening in a higher level to us. And the one that's explaining this, well, it's Jesus in his time, but John in the book of Revelation, or even Daniel that lived thousands of years ago, trying to explain it to people now, it's a really difficult thing to do. And here's where we come back always to the Word of God, to the consensus that all the books have together, and also to revelation from God. And that is what the book of Revelation is called. It's called that because it's a revelation from God. But make sure that we're always coinciding with different books in the Bible, not just one source. We keep reading in verse 30, and it says, "Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." Jesus starts speaking about his second coming, where he's going to take his church, And in verse 31, he says, he will send his angels with great sound of trumpets, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to another. He's talking about none other than the rapture. He's going to take his church up with him. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near and at the door. Nobody really knows the hour or the time of his second coming. But in this verse right here, he illustrates that even though we don't know the exact time, the exact moment, I couldn't say, for example, it's going to be, for example, May 15, 2028. If somebody says that, I would very cautiously say that nobody knows the hour, just like Jesus said. However, the seasons and the times are for us to know. He says it here. He says, when the leaves are ready, you know that the time is coming. So we as believers, as followers of Jesus, Jesus will give us signs, and he will start saying, it is time. It's getting close. And I believe that's where we are right now. And another side note, the fig tree is always a symbol of Israel and how God sees Israel. We move on. It says, so you will also know that these things, know that it is near. That is the 33rd verse. 34th, it says, assuredly I say to you, this generation by no means will pass away till these things take place. I have a bigger theory about what Jesus is speaking to about here. And many theologians have summarized that this is the generation that saw the Israelites come back to the promised land in 1948. And Jesus is saying that that generation, the one that saw the birth of Israel being born again, wouldn't see all these things pass. They wouldn't pass away. They wouldn't die before they saw these things pass. Now, how long is a generation is the question. I'm going to sidestep that and go forward, but I'll leave that question for you to think about. How long is that generation, and when is Jesus speaking about these things? It says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words by no means will pass away. But on that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. This is where Jesus is saying the exact day nobody knows, but we will know the seasons. But as the days of Noah, here's where the signs come in. As the days of Noah were, so will also be the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days of Noah before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And I believe we're way past that. Those times have already been with us several decades. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also be the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two men will be in the field. One man will be taken and the other one left. Two women will be grinding in the mill, and one will be taken and the other one left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what the hour of the Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would also have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. If the Israelite people would have known that Hamas was going to destroy them and kill them and hunt them down, they would have been better prepared that day recently that happened. And that's what Jesus is speaking about. He's saying that we need to be prepared because we don't really know the exact time. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give him the food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes back, he finds him doing well. Assuredly, I say to you, that he will make him ruler over all the goods. Jesus is saying that if we keep doing what we're doing, even if we don't know the exact time, when he comes back and he sees that we're doing the right things, that you're doing the right things, that we're growing the kingdom of heaven, that we're taking care of his stuff, God will be pleased and he will make us rulers later on, there is a later on, by the way. There is a later on. There's something even bigger going to happen later. And he's going to make us rulers of that. And it says, but if the evil servant says in his heart, and this is verse 48, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. Now we see the other picture of someone who God entrusted his wealth, his household with, but he's abusing it. He says that the master will come back, and it says that he's going to take a look at him. It says in verse 50, it says the master of the servant will come on the day where he's not looking for him, and at an hour that he's not aware of, and he will cut him in two and appoint him the portion of him with the hypocrites. So he's going to cut that servant out, and he's going to throw him into the hypocrites. There shall be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. There he's speaking of the lake of fire, not even just hell. Hell is a moment here that's happening now, but hell, death, the devil, the Antichrist, the false prophet, they're all going to be put into the lake of fire, where there's no return from that. And that's what Jesus is warning us against, for us to do the right thing, to build this church, to keep following him, and be able to affect others and bring others into the kingdom. And this is where chapter 24 ends. Jesus giving us a small picture of what the end times will be like. It goes into the 25th chapter, which we should probably read another day. If you would want to hear this another day, leave a like here, or say, yes, I want to read chapter 25, because it's a continuation of a great chapter of 24. In the future, we'll probably do a couple of chapters in Revelation and even some in Daniel. All of these chapters intertwine, and they give us the bigger picture, a bigger, more complete picture of what the end times will be. Thank you for being here with me, hearing this chapter 24. It's a great blessing to share this. Sometimes it does bring a little bit of a heavy heart to myself, is because of the things that we're seeing. I wish that it wasn't like that. Like Jesus said, it would be sad for those parents who have small kids and nursing, because our kids are growing up in this turbulent times. In all cases, Jesus says himself, he says in Luke, he says, when these things happen, he says, lift up your head, look to the sky, because we know that a redemption is near. Even though we have a heavy heart, we have hope. And I'll leave you with that today, with a symbol of hope. The symbol of the Son of Man that it says here. They will see the sign of the Son of Man. And I believe that's hope. That's what we have. As believers, as followers of Jesus, he's coming back for us. He's coming back for our church. Thank you for being here. God bless you. And I'll see you in the next one.